scripture reading this morning will be 2 Timothy 1. We'll read verses 3 through 7. 2 Timothy 1, verses 3 through 7. I thank God whom I serve, as did my ancestors, with a clear conscience, as I remember you constantly in my prayers night and day. As I remember your tears, I long to see you, that I may be filled with joy. I am reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now, I am sure, dwells in you as well. For this reason, I remind you to fan into flames the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God gave us a spirit, not of fear, but of power and love and self-control.
It's almost like you never left, isn't it? Thank you, Scott. What a wonderful day. My wife was saying as we were walking out the door, don't forget your coat, because beautiful days like today can fool you. A day like this in Texas, and you're walking out and it's 75, 80 degrees, even in the middle of January. You get here and it's 30 degrees and you can't wear your shorts and things. So it's a day that'll fool you, but I love days like this. With a few clouds in the skies, it just reminds me that God has painted a masterpiece for each and every one of us to praise and extol, to be reminded of His greatness and His loving care and His watchful care over us. If you're visiting with us this morning, we want you to know how blessed we are that you are here, that you have taken time out of your day and your week to worship with us, to seek the favor of God with us. And we want you to know, if you're looking for a church home, some place to call family, welcome home. You're wanted and welcome right here at the Brighton Church of Christ. A group of family, a group of Christians that are seeking to get to heaven to the best of our ability, and to take as many people as we can with us. And we want you to go as well. Just a couple of announcements I did want to make mention of. Anthony's got the youth ice skating event coming up this Saturday, February 1st. And so if you've got questions about that, you might see Anthony or Jennifer about that. And also the Mountain States Children's Home will be doing their pickup on February 9th. So if you have any groceries that you want to donate to them, be sure and bring them up here before February 9th, which will be not this Saturday, but the next Sunday, the 9th. They'll come the next day, actually. So that 9th is the last day that you'll be able to bring things for that. It was the spring of 1988. It seems so long ago. It was in that spring that I obeyed the gospel. And shortly after obeying the gospel, it was the influence, I would say, of my father in the gospel. His name was Danny. And he was highly committed to the church and highly committed to personal work. He always talked about personal work. And every day he was talking about personal work and personal work and personal work. So when I became a Christian, I too was highly committed to the church. I went to every service immediately. I didn't have to kind of ramp up into my Christianity. It was run headlong into. It was more like it. And it was because of his influence, the influence of his family. And so I naturally became highly committed, and I spent more time with Christians from that moment onward than I did with those who were non-Christians. And it wasn't long before the friends that I played with while I was growing up, those that we hung around with as a teenager, that we began to drift apart, or more accurately, I drifted away from them, I might say. They continued to do teenage hijinks, and while I was more and more converted and dedicated to the church. Looking back, what I see is that it was much easier for me to build a wall than it was to build a bridge. It was to build a wall to keep them separated from me so that I didn't fall into those same hijinks and silly things that they were doing. But what it did is it helped me develop a strong faith, but it also greatly hindered my effectiveness in outreach. And that's a balance kind of that we have to strike. Sometimes when we talk about evangelism, and we've been started this year with the challenge that I set before you, 20 people in the year 2020. That's a challenge that we can reach. It's a challenge that the potential is within our hands. It's not something that is too hard for us. It's not something that is too difficult for us. We serve a God who wants to give the increase. Oftentimes we use the passage in 1 Corinthians 3 where I planted and Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. We say, well, it's not going to happen until God gives the growth, as if God is somehow reluctant for us to grow. What Paul is saying is that when we do our part, God will amplify its effects. It's not that God is hesitant to give us the growth. It's too often that we are hesitant to plant and water as God has called us to do. We're talking about evangelism. We're talking about outreach. We're talking about saving people. That's what we're trying to do, is change the world, to make an impact right here in Brighton, Colorado, one that'll have its effects spread across the land. What can one convert do? What can 2 converts do? What can 20 converts do in Brighton, Colorado? The potential is mind-boggling. But sometimes when it comes to evangelizing, it's confusing. It's mystifying. It's confusifying. Sometimes it's just downright scary. There's so much that can go wrong. There's so much that we could do wrong. There's so many things that could happen. So we're afraid too often, and a lot of time the issue revolves around these obstacles or these hurdles that are in the path of evangelism. And it seems to me when we come to 2 Timothy 1 that Timothy was at least having a rough patch, we might say, some struggles in his ministry. Paul says, I thank God whom I serve as I did my ancestors. Just like they served, I serve this God. And just as they were thankful, I am thankful. And then he says, as I remember you constantly in my prayers night and day. Isn't that an amazing, touching story of the connection that Paul and Timothy had? Paul's referred to as Timothy's father in the gospel, but here's a man who is looking at his protege and he sees that he's struggling. He says, I'm praying for you night and day. Verse 4, he says, as I remember your tears. I don't think in this context he's speaking of tears of joy that Timothy is shedding. I suppose that might be possible that we sometimes talk about tears of joy, but it appears in the context that these are tears of trial, tears of persecution, maybe tears of wanting to reach his community and not able to, that he's just having, we might say, a rough patch in his particular ministry. Now, we might be quick to say, well, yeah, that's because he was being persecuted, and certainly he was. Later, or in the first letter, he said, don't let them despise your youth. And so we understand that some things were happening in that sense, but notice how he continues in this. He speaks quickly of his, even though he doesn't say, well, I know you were crying because of this, he does immediately go into encouraging his faith, that maybe his faith itself was wavering or it was starting to weaken a little bit, reminding him to, notice, fan the flames of the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. You have a gift. Most likely this is one of the miraculous gifts for Timothy, probably the gift of proclamation. We often talk about our gifts, the different talents that we might have, and whether it is a miraculous gift from the first century or today, even those miracles have done away, we still have spiritual gifts today. And notice what he says, that talent that you have, you need to fan the flame, to make it grow, to have it heat up so that it spreads out. And in other words, keep working in your ministry. Keep fanning those flames. Why? Because God did not give you a spirit of fear. What is he afraid of? Is he afraid of those that he's preaching to, that maybe they don't respect him? Maybe. Is he afraid that they would not continue in the way of righteousness? Possibly. Is he afraid in the realm of evangelism to reach out to a community that is somewhat hostile to the gospel itself? Quite possibly. Timothy, this man of God, needs to be encouraged. What about us today? If Timothy was struggling with doubts in his ministry to other people, Christians and non-Christians, Paul tells him to take that gift and use it responsibly. I think that message still comes to us, doesn't it? We don't have a spirit of fear. We've got this spirit which God has given to us of power and love, that is a spirit of self-control, that we make choices about what we're going to do. Our responsibility then continues to minister to Christians and non-Christians alike. In 1978, Joe Aldrich wrote a book called Lifestyle Evangelism, where he looks at evangelism from a natural perspective, a natural outgrowth of our Christianity, our faith. Now, I understand that Aldrich was not a New Testament Christian, but some of the principles that he applies, in fact, a lot of the principles that he applies would still apply to those of us who are New Testament Christians. Aldrich identifies what he calls 5 hurdles that stand in the way of effective evangelism. This morning, I want to look at those 5 and see how we might overcome those particular hurdles so that our evangelism would be more natural, part of our lifestyle. As Kevin Harney would write in his book, Organic Outreach, that it is a natural outgrowth of who we are as children of God. See if these hurdles are something that you identify with, and be encouraged that there are ways to overcome all of them. The first one that he talks about is that there are too many people. As time progresses, the world's population increases more and more and more and more. We're somewhere between 7 and 7.5 billion people on the earth today. And we know that most of them, the vast majority of them, are lost. That ought to hit us in the pit of our stomach, right? It ought to make us sit up and take note that there are lost people around us, and we're not talking 1 or 2 on the other side of town. We're talking the most people in town and across the state and around the world. With more and more people, our capacity to relate to others in a meaningful way is hampered. There's so many people, we can't get to know all of them, right? I can't know 7 million people. I can't know 7 billion people. Man, I have a hard time with 700 people or even 70 people. We can't get to know them all and build meaningful relationships with them. Aldrich put it this way. He said, excessive relational demands have crippled our relational capacity. With so many people out there to relate to, we end up shutting down and not relating to any. There are too many people. And with so many people, we often fail to see people. You know, what does 7 million people look like? What does 700,000 people look like? Those are numbers that are hard for us to wrap our mind around. And so it's just a crowd, it's just a mass. But we don't see the people. And that's the part that we run into. 300 million people in the United States almost become zero. Because we can't see them, because we isolate ourselves. I don't want to bother you. Isn't that how we feel about most strangers? I don't want to bother you. Because in reality, I don't want you to bother me either. We isolate, we protect ourselves that way. And so today, most Christians do not have significant relationships with people outside the church. And by significant, I mean ones that you feel comfortable talking about important themes of life. More than whether or not that work order got loaded on the truck yesterday or not, more than whether or not the produce was all put out or not, more than if we're making a poster for this week's game or not. Those are superficial things. Whether or not a poster or a banner gets done for a game this weekend doesn't draw you closer to heaven. Doesn't pull their heart into the grace of God. They're superficial relationships. And so when we get past those superficial relationships, we find out that a lot of Christians don't have meaningful relationships with people who are not Christians. One day, as the tide was going out, an old man was walking along the seashore, and he noticed coming toward him was a little boy who was throwing rocks into the ocean. He kept bending down, picking up rocks and throwing. However, as he got closer and closer to the young man, he realized he wasn't throwing rocks into the ocean. He was picking up the starfish that had been left in the sands when the waters receded, and he was throwing the starfish back into the ocean. When they finally met each other on the shore, the old man said to the little boy, he said, what are you doing? You can never save them all. There are too many of them. You can't make a difference. This is the natural order of things, he told the young man. The little boy looked at the starfish he was holding in his hand and looked up at the man, and he threw the starfish in the water, and he said, I made a difference for that one. We may not be able to save the mass, but we can make a difference for that one. And that's what evangelism is about. We're not trying to save everyone. We're trying to make a difference in just one person's life. Don't get distracted by how many people there are and how many are lost. Focus on the one you can save. I'm not talking about yourself. I'm talking about the one person that you can talk to this week. We're nearing the end of January. February is right around the corner. The day before yesterday, I wrote down my name for February. I already know his name. And I'm going to work with him. I hope you have your chart. I hope you have that chart of prospects, and you're putting names down, and you're praying for them right now. And I don't know how your January is going, but if you haven't been able to connect with them, you've only got a few days left this month to connect with them. Listen, this only works if we're trying to make that meaningful connection, that one that we can focus on, that one that we can build a bridge to. Build a bridge. You see, it's so much easier to build a wall so that I'll be stronger faithfully. It's easy to build a wall to separate myself from the world so I'll be better, but let's not build a wall, let's build a bridge so that we may cross that bridge and bring them to the grace of God. There's too many people. Let's jump that hurdle. Secondly, he identifies that there are too many distractions. There's too many distractions. Years ago, a man named Elvis Presley, some of you may have heard of him, sang a song, Make the World Go Away. Do y'all remember that song? Some of you might remember it. Make the world go away. Get it off my shoulders. Say the things that we used to say. Just make the world go away. He's singing to a lost love that it appears the world has pulled them apart. His cares and burdens of life have pulled him in this direction, and her cares and burdens of life have pulled her in this direction. He wants her back, and so he says, make the world go away. There's too much that is coming between us. He wants their love to come back and be united again. In much the same way, the hustle and bustle of life that separate them is the same hustle and bustle of life that pulls us away from other people, away from the world, and distracts us from what is most important. The world, or more specifically, I should say, the ruler of this world, separates us from the lost, the people who need us most. Aldrich, in his book, talks about technological acceleration when he talks about distractions. That's funny in 1978. Because if there were technological acceleration in 1978, if it was a hurdle in 1978, it must be Mount Everest today when we talk about technology. computers and television, live streaming, programming on demand, smartphones, social media, instant communication, blogging, vlogging, logging, going viral, telecommuting, remote meetings, traffic jams. We are simply inundated with noise. Years ago, we got there was a series of 3 VHS cassettes, and they were of old cartoons, Woody Woodpecker and Tom and Jerry and all these. And there was an old Betty Boop cartoon. Some of you may remember Betty Boop. And she's in the city, and she hears the jackhammers and the horns and the sirens, and she's just frustrated. She goes, noise, noise, noise. And she's just frustrated. And so she goes to the country, and she puts the hammock between the trees, and she's laying down for a nap, and you hear the crickets start chirping and the frogs start going, and all before you know it, she's going, noise, noise, noise. And she goes back to the city. That's our lives. We're surrounded by noise, 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 a cacophony of noise that is a constant drumbeat in the background of our lives, and they're distractions to us. And I'm not saying that computers are bad or cell phones are bad. I'm just saying we understand they're there, and they have a potential of controlling our lives. But we have a greater potential of controlling them for our use. Remember, your phone is your servant, not your master. Aside from the explosion of technology, there's that constant threat of the world, nations rising up against nations. It seems like it's constantly before us. The threat of nuclear annihilation, Islamic terrorism, crashing world markets, little rocket man, communist hostility. They're all around us, and the world is a dangerous place, and it's hard not to realize that occupies a lot of mind space in the world. Already we struggle to make meaningful connections with people outside the church. But you throw in the busyness and the worry and other distractions into the mix, and obstacles to personal evangelism simply grow and grow and grow. As Christians, we must keep our schedules open as possible, and be flexible so we can meet others on their terms. Not long ago, someone called and contacted me and was wanting to meet. And I said, I'm available on. And I gave him some days and things. And I said, now, if you can't meet at those times, let me know, and I'll try to open up something else. And, the days I was available was on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. You see how that goes. And so I didn't get anything on Monday or Tuesday. Tuesday night, it was like, hey, I'm going to see if I can meet with you, on Wednesday. Fine, great. Nothing on Wednesday. I contacted him on Wednesday. I said, hey, I moved some things around so that, Thursday's going to be pretty light duty for me. So anytime Thursday is fine. That's great. So I'm trying to get all my work done before Friday so I can take my day off, right? So he calls me Thursday night and said, how about Friday? So, yeah, Friday's good. Be flexible as much as possible. When Jesus, in John chapter 4, was with the Samaritans, he'd met the woman. She goes into the town, and the town people come out, and they meet Jesus. Now remember, he's on a journey. He's trying to get to Galilee. He's on this journey, and they stop, and they say, will you stay with us? And Jesus, in his flexibility, it says in John 4:40 that he stayed with them for 2 days. That's flexibility. Be intentional. We don't accidentally overcome the distractions. You don't accidentally become the master of your technology because it's constantly trying to overtake you. You have to be intentional in overcoming the distractions. There's too many people, there's too many distractions, and there's too little training. Too little training for ourselves to know the gospel. Preachers who spend too much time evangelizing the evangelized. Sermons like this, I'm guilty of it right now. Evangelizing the evangelized. Or we open our services and we want people to come in and hear the gospel for the first time. The problem is the church, for whom worship is designed, needs to receive the whole counsel of God. Churches that are fed a steady diet of evangelizing or just evangelistic sermons miss out on the whole counsel of God. Paul, remember in Acts chapter 20, 27, said, I'm not ashamed to proclaim unto you the whole counsel of God. Christians need more than these evangelistic encouragement or methodology from the pulpit. They need exposure to the Savior, understanding of the doctrine, wrestling with difficult passages, the picture of Christian living. It is only out of this robust fullness of the gospel that we can actually reach the lost. Sometimes training in evangelism focuses on ways, on methods that are weak or sometimes even unbiblical. We've been a fan, for example, for a long time of ambush evangelism, where strangers are surprised by a snippet of the gospel in hopes that they will fall in love with the message and seek to know more. And what history has showed us is that ambush evangelism like that is pretty ineffective. Partly because I think we, as Christians, aren't fully developed in the gospel ourselves. Harmon was a crotchety old man. Is that a good term? A grumpy old man. But he was very zealous for God. And zealous and grumpy aren't a good combination. Every year, he joined with there was a group of Christians, a congregation in Lawton, Oklahoma. They had an evangelistic mission every year to a certain city. They'd go to different cities and things like that. And every year he would join that group of Christians when they went and did their door knocking campaigns. And in this one particular campaign, he went and he knocked on the door, and no one answered for a long time. And he and his evangelistic partner were turned and walking away when the door finally sprung open really quick. They turned around, there's a man standing there in a towel. Water dripping down his body, shampoo going down his cheeks. And he said, what can I help you with? I think the guy was from Oklahoma, so he's very polite, even though he was obviously pulled right out of his shower. And Harmon simply asked him that question that really gets to the heart of the matter. What religion are you? And the man said, well, I'm a Catholic. I go to the Catholic Church. Which Harmon really went to the most important aspect of the gospel, the thing that leads everyone to Christ. He said, you know, the priests sleep with the nuns and they kill the babies to hide the evidence. We can do much more harm than good with that kind of evangelism. While God may occasionally bless such ambushes like that, more often than not, they're unnatural, they're unhealthy, and they're unbiblical, as that one was. Notice what Jesus said to the man who was in the tombs in Mark chapter 5. The man, the demons are cast out, he's in his right mind. He's seen these great things happen, and Jesus is about to leave, and that man's right behind Jesus. Where are we going, boss? And Jesus said, no, you can't get in the boat with me. Go home and tell your friends what the Lord has done for you. All the great things that he has done. Mark 5 and verse 19. You see that? Go home and tell your friends. I'm not going to tell you that evangelism among your friends is the only way that evangelism works. But I will tell you, it is the most effective means of evangelism. Relationships lead to deeper conversations about life, about meaning of life, that naturally lead to sharing God's grace with others. And there's too little training in that. The fourth hurdle that we need to overcome is that there's too little connection. According to Aldrich, in order for Christians to have an impact, there must be contact. We've got to make contact. Last night we were cooking a pot of beans, and they'd been cooking and simmering for a long time, and I went over and I was going to taste them. Just you always got to taste to make sure they're right. So I tasted the beans, and immediately I realized these beans need salt. Now, they were cooking on the stovetop, and less than 24 inches away was a shaker of salt right there. And that salt sat in that shaker all those hours that the beans were simmering. The whole time. And the beans never got saltier because the salt never left the container. But once the salt left the container, it did its job. We are the salt of the earth. And yet, if we are not making contacts with those in our immediate vicinity, if we're not touching our neighbors and our friends and our family and our co-work and the relationships, if we're not making contact with them, our saltiness is worthless. If we picture this building as our container, if we're not getting out of the container with our Christianity, then we're not salting the earth. For most Christians, research says that within 2 years after their conversion, they have no significant relationship with non-Christians. In 2 years, they've isolated themselves from those that they need to reach. Evangelism thrives through connection. If we're not connecting with people, we're not evangelizing. Spiritual health is not separation from the unsaved. I think sometimes we believe if we're separated from the unsaved, that's spiritual health. That's not spiritual health. We need to quit viewing the world as the enemy and rather see them as the victims of the enemy. The devil is the enemy. And those who are caught in the throes of sin are victims of the enemy, the devil himself. And in their victim status, we live in a world that loves victim status. Here's the real victim. Sinners are victims of the devil. And so we look at them as people who need to be saved, people that need our connection. And we have a lot in common with them. Oh, wait a minute, Sam. I try to live a righteous life. I don't have anything in common with those who are choosing sinful lifestyles, who are living in adultery or living in fornication or who are filled with greed. I don't have anything in common with that kind of person. I look at them and I see people with a mortgage and a car payment, with kids who sometimes misbehave, with marriages that aren't always perfect, with lawns to mow and cars to wash and a few pounds to lose, an interest in sports that I'm interested in, schools and hobbies. There's so much that we have in common with people like that. Instead of focusing on the fact that, they're not Christians and I am, let's focus on the fact that they're people in much the same areas of life that we are, and reach out to them. Host a bridge club at your house on Tuesday mornings, or Bunko, I think that's the newer one. Bunko night. A block picnic. This is something I've dreamed of doing, have yet to do, but I'd love to do. Pick a day, some evening in the summer, 6:30, set your grill up out by the curb, pass out flyers the day before and say, hey, when y'all are coming home from work tomorrow evening, come get a free burger. Cook some burgers. Or if you want to do hot dogs, you can. They make me sick, so I'm going to stick with the burger. But grill something for the block. Connect with the people that are around you. Or maybe you've got tax day coming up here on April 15th, right? Maybe you can talk to a tax preparer, someone that you're a friend, or a CPA. Say, hey, I'd like to host a deal at my house where people can ask questions about their taxes. Would you come and answer some questions? People might be interested in something like that. a game watch party. Maybe there's a big football game or something coming up in a couple weeks, and you want to get some people together and record it and watch it after services and skip the commercials. Maybe that's something you want to do, or maybe it's some other game, or maybe you like to shoot firearms, and you know someone else that likes to shoot firearms. Hey, we got a range out here. Let's go out there and shoot. You see, we can connect with people on these pretty superficial levels, but once people start to see that there is a connection, there's a care for them, their hearts open for deeper and deeper conversations. If you're shooting with someone, you don't just have to talk about how many grains the bullet you're shooting is. There's other things to talk about too. And those conversations will naturally come when we're connected. And then finally, that last hurdle that Aldrich identifies, there's too little incarnation. That is, when our lives do not accurately reflect the gospel that we want to share with others, it will hinder our effectiveness. The gospel must be incarnated in our lives. People must see it lived daily. Do we make a point to show our faith to our community? It isn't enough to simply live Christ silently in a corner where people don't see me. We must be seen so that He can be seen. Right? Our lives should be lived on the street corners in beauty and compassion and love. Aldrich says that the two greatest forces in evangelism are a healthy church. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about the need for fellowship and connecting with one another, a healthy church so that others will want to be a part of that, and a healthy marriage. Didn't see that one coming, did you? Why? Because a healthy marriage reflects God's marriage to the church. The very body, the bride of Christ that we're trying to make people a part of. And so they need to see that in our lives are good marriages because we're part of a good church. It's a marriage where love is seen, the message gets heard. When people see the love, they will hear the message. Aldrich encourages we must become candidates for God's blessings, to begin to incarnate His beauty in our relationships and open these relationships to non-Christians. We must become candidates of God's blessings. We obey the gospel so we can receive God's salvation. And then we must His beauty. We must incarnate His beauty. In other words, show Christ in our lives to build relationships. And then when those relationships open, we can build that bridge to the non-Christians. Or Peter would put it this way: in your hearts honor Christ as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. 1 Peter 3:15 and 16. We always like to talk about, hey, be ready to give an answer to the questions of the hope that is in you. And then we find ourselves never being asked questions about the hope that is in us. I think it's because the hope that is in us is not seen by others. We can chalk it up to the world's too distracted, they can't see it. But if you want to be seen in a world filled with distractions, you've got to become a bigger distraction. That's what it means. You've got to hold a bigger sign. You've got to live out louder than everything else. Maybe we think we're too humble to do that. Maybe we should be too humble not to do that. Because Christ must be seen. Holy lives lived loudly, will pique the interest of our neighbors. We are God's witnesses to the world. That's a fact. That means that we need to defeat the hurdles ahead of us by focusing on one person at a time, eliminating distractions, saturating ourselves in the Word of God, connecting with more people, and exhibiting the holiness of Christ in our lives. Sheldon Van Auken observed, the best argument for Christianity is Christians, their joy, their certainty, their completeness. But the strongest argument against Christianity is also Christians. When they are somber and joyless, when they are self-righteous and smug and complacent consecration. What he means by that is when we are over here, well, at least I'm right. At least I'm doing right. I don't care about my neighbors. I'm going to do it right. He says when Christians are that way, Christianity dies 1,000 deaths. And he's so right. It's not up to us to sit over in smug consecration of righteousness. I'm so good. Or I'm just going to do my best to keep me righteous. I think more people are like that second one. I'm just going to keep me righteous than I'm better than everybody else. But the result is the same thing. It creates a barrier. It disconnects. It isolates us. And it destroys our evangelism. 20 in 2020 means we've got to jump these hurdles. Let's overcome every one of them. It's our divine birthright to do so. What might be holding you back this morning? Maybe it's just obeying the gospel. Maybe that's where you're standing at the threshold. Let's jump in. Let's enter the race. Maybe along the way you've knocked over a few hurdles. I think every hurdler at some point in their life, Jennifer, eventually hits a hurdle, don't they? But let's go back and try it again. Let's get over it this time. Let's be victorious as we reach out and save the lost. If you have a need this morning to answer his invitation to strengthen your life or to obey the gospel, would you come while we stand and while we sing?